What's going on, beautiful J4 family and community? Thank you guys for joining me on a Sunday. I hope it's a fun day. I hope your house is clean and you listen to your favorite music and your favorite football team, if you have one, is winning. What's going on, family? This is J4 Conversations about raising beautiful Black and biracial children. Today, we are going to expand upon the theme of biracialities. Biracialities, the realities of biracial people in America in the 21st century, 2022 to be exact. Welcome, y'all. Welcome. If you guys are in the chat, hey, shout out your channel. Today, I want to see if we can meet some new biracial folks. The title, hopefully the algorithm caught some eyes, caught some interest. If you guys are new to the space, welcome. This is a chance where we're going to drop some questions in the chat. We'll primarily work in the chat, but if there's some opportunity and if there's some interest, I might drop the link and bring somebody up. We have our first comment. Should be interesting. Jose Negron. I don't know. We'll see what kind of happens in here, but thank you guys for joining me. Jose, drop your channel in the chat. This is channel drop time. Drop your channel in the chat. That way we can explore who's here in the community. We can support each other if it makes sense. We can learn about what beautiful human beings are doing in their lives, whether they're doing reaction videos, personal testimony, or as in the case of J4 Conversations, trying to be of use to families raising beautiful biracial children. All right. Dr. Went is in the house. AJ, I'm sorry it's been a while. It has been a while, Dr. Went, for due and good reason. Y'all, Dr. Went left Arizona State University. It is our loss. She is now the lead person, executive vice president, ambassador, chancellor, provost, whatever the title might be. It's high, y'all. She's representing diversity and inclusion at a small school in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you so much, Dr. Wynn, for being here. We definitely need to chop. We owe that conversation. All right, y'all. Y'all check out Jose Negron. His channel is called, my channel is Uncommon Sense with Jose Negron. In terms of my cursory understanding of it, it is a page of people wanting to express goodwill, seeking the best out of each other, peppered in, I'm sure, with some life storytelling and some general, just leveraging this technological space as a way of creating community. This space can be so adversarial. It can be so antagonistic. It can be such a place where people behind a relative anonymity are just kind of going at each other and revealing, in some instances, the lower self compared to the higher self. And Jose strikes me as someone who's seeking to tap into the higher self. In fact, through his own words, my channel is a space for all to speak freely. Beautiful. This is the time to drop your channel. If you are a YouTube content creator, please feel free to do so. All right. So now, biracialities is talking about the realities of biracial folks. I think more and more now than ever, you have a community of folks who, love their mother, they love their father. They've had varying levels of engagement in Black communities, and for reasons of just wanting something more representative of themselves, or perhaps for, bumping heads in some instances in Black circles and communities, they're expressing a want and a desire for something anew or something in addition to, right? I'm not saying a denunciation of Blackness, thankfully, but I am seeing sort of a call for something new, something that's more reflective, at least in terms of social construction, something that represents the existence and realities of people born to two love sources of different kinds of cultures. So today we want to chop it up and get to meet some people, right? We want to expand the audience a bit and kind of see what's going on. So the first question I want to throw out here to you all is, let's see here. All right. What is your racial birth makeup? Okay. What is your racial birth makeup? Now, I'm making a distinction between birth distinction and cultural distinction. All right. I'll ask that question a little bit later. But what is your birth racial distinction? And shout out to those who are coming in. Appreciate you guys. If you guys are first new to the channel, thank you guys so much. Welcome. And if you're comfortable with some form of revelation, keep your avatar up, whatever the case may be. But I'd like to know, I have a sense of who some core followers, and thank you guys. Thank you, Jose Negron. Thank you, Dr. Wint. Thank you, Mulatto Vanguard and others. But if you're new to the channel, would love to know you, particularly what are your circumstances in the space of biracialities, and ultimately any questions you might have to share here collectively in the chat or to myself directly. I don't confess a life expertise. I confess a life lived. So to the point of the question, what is your racial birth makeup? I was born 1968. My mother is from France, a little town called Rouen, and she's a white European woman. And then my father was born in New Orleans to a Creole identity, and but obviously within a blackness for him. And they met in the early 60s, and I think got married in 64, came back to the United States. He was an Air Force guy in 66, and then I was born in 1968. So the realities of biracial existence in the latter part of the 60s was a small percentage of human beings that had a biracialness. It was about 1% of human beings at that time were biracial. 3% of couples were interracial, even in the midst of coming right off the Loving case of 1967. And for me, I grew up biracial, lived in the proverbial gray for some time. But right around 16, 17, 18, I decided that I was going to get out of the proverbial gray and land into a blackness. And so I did that primarily in the latter part of high school and then immersed myself fully. I dipped myself in blackness in college, largely through organization, courses that I took, and friend circles that I created and was a part of. All right. Jose, born in 1962 to Puerto Rican parents in the U.S. All right, so Afro-Latino. Beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's see who else we might have in here. It might just be me and you now, Jose. All right. Let's go to the next question. Were you raised by both parents or one? I'm interested to see if biracial identity, and I'm sure it is influenced by growing up in two-parent homes versus one-parent home. And if it's one-parent home, it's largely led by, at least in black-white dynamics, a white mother. Yesterday or a couple of days ago, we did a show where we talked about the percentage of children born to single-parent homes, and the data included two or more races. And 42% of biracial kids, black, white, or no, mixed in general, we don't know the heritage configuration, were raised in single parent homes, 42%. And I'm wondering if there's a dynamic around identity comfort, identity thinking, identity esteem. If you're raised by a white mother, obviously you have tremendous regard and care and love for mama. The dad is absent or not there, or there but not physically in the home. And what are some of the feelings about that towards dad, and does that then drip into notions of identity? Or if a person lived in two-parent homes, were they a little bit more nested in a comfort in existing in both particular cultural communities? I don't know. I'd like to learn about that. All right. Jose, I was raised with both parents in the home. However, most of my values come from my mom. Yeah. Is that because dad was kind of an old school dad and wasn't assuming that role, or give us a sense of why that might be, Jose? I was raised in a two-parent home, although there was some rigidness there until about 16 when they divorced, about 15 and a half. And my dad has always kind of been took full ownership of kind of my rearing in terms of exposure to different things to expand my worldview. Certainly the conversations that needed to be had between fathers and sons, he didn't shy away from those in any kind of way. Highly prioritized education. So I would say he was certainly my role model and steward, but that was because my mother, for whatever reasons, was dealing with some other kinds of things, and so he stepped into that caring kind of role. So I'm kind of the inverse from where you are, Jose. I did not have a close relationship with my father. He mostly worked and had little time with me. All right. Sorry to hear that, brother. Sorry to hear that. I wonder if that's somewhat generational, right? If you were born in 62, if you just think of a generation 25, so Pops was probably born in, I guess, the late 30s or early 40s, whatever the math is on that. And, maleness, fatherhood, husbandhood perhaps took on a different tone. But I would certainly say that today's generation of children who are around parents, assuming all that's functional and whatnot, might have a little bit more closer proximity to their fathers. I'm assuming here, I'm generalizing tremendously. They might have a little bit more proximity and access to their father in ways that previous generations may not have. And I know I'm generalizing here, but I would certainly say the question of care, play, empathy, gestures of love, direct articulation of I love you, touch, embrace, hugs, that was something that was certainly heavily on my mind when I was thinking about the kind of relationship I wanted to have with my children. And, I have varying levels of closeness with my children. Everything isn't 100 across the board, there's always work there to be done. But that was top of mind for me. That was top of mind for me about not just being a disciplinarian or always minding the environment to make sure that character issues are top of mind, but also to have moments, particularly when they were younger and in different kind of way in their teens and young adultness, about a proximity that they knew they could have access to their father. As a parenting channel, that's critically important. That fathers, I do think, should have distinct roles from mothers, which is the benefit of a two-parent home because you can split responsibilities. And then if you're in a single parent home, again, depending on the parent that's not there, their proximity and their, what kind of relationship they have, a lot of that falls on the one person. And but in my instances, in terms of parenting, it's healthy to have parents who can both show care and concern, but parents who also can be a destination for one type of need that a child may have, one type of conversation style that might work in a certain time in a certain kind of way, and then the other parent plays a certain kind of or an alternative way of talking and thinking and engaging the children. That way, they get a holistic kind of connect to parents and a sense of rearing and coming of age that's reflective of that. Shout out to single parents. There's a lot of single parents, unfortunately, in today's society. Shout out to what you're dealing with. I'm sure there's mad success and mad frustration in that process. But again, if at all possible, beautiful folks, regardless of your heritage, culture, and background, make them babies out of preparation, which comes after courtship and marriage and all that kind of stuff. All right. Jose's father was born 1929. Okay, yeah, so you can imagine the dynamics there. For y'all just joining us, hey, shout out your channel if you have one. Welcome. If you are a person that is biracial, we've asked the question of what is your particular birth heritage makeup. I indicated my mom is from France, so that's European white. My dad's a Creole black cat from New Orleans. And then Jose is so far the one participating with me. He's a Puerto Rican. Pops, both his parents are from Puerto Rico. All right. Let's see what the next question will be. How do you identify culturally? All right. This is the essence of why I've been on this pathway for a little bit now, in part because we did a video called White Mothers and Their Biracial Black Sons. It was this biracial black that sort of caught the interest of people. The video went viral, at least in terms of my page, 35,000 views. And I discovered in that process that there was not consensus. There was not consensus in those who were commenting, whether tongue in cheek or emotionally or from life lived, that there was not this consensus that biracial kids, black, white, naturally just leaned into a cultural blackness, which had been my pathway. And I discovered that there were many, many beautiful young people, both black and biracial, who were saying, no, we're not black. And in some cases, they were doing that out of a sense of gatekeeping, and they were tired of that. And then in some instances, they were refusing to do what my generation did in many instances, was to silence white mothers in most cases, and to the uplift of the black side of the house. And, we did that based upon our circumstances coming of age in the 70s and early 80s. But today's generation, if they're younger, they were rejecting a cultural paradigm that somehow had to, sort of create cultural hierarchy, and they were not going to do that in a way that in any way suggested anything other than parallel equality and sort of an ownership of both parents' identity within themselves. And so I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. All right. Hosea says, my father did not express himself well with words. Yeah, yeah. Man, there's varying levels of comfort with that. I think, deeds are as important as words. Examples are as important as words. But today, I would think there's hyper communication. If you think about the amount of words that are said in the 21st century versus the amount of words that were said in the 20th century, I'm just musing here. I imagine there was much more a premium placed on communication in today's generation, in large part because physical labor is not the dominant norm of working in the modern era. It's more so the manipulation of technology and the manipulation of information. And the main vehicle of that is largely communication, both in written and verbally. And and so the stoic, silent male of the past was the reality of for many people in my generation and beyond. But today, I would think that parents, both men and women, I'm stereotyping here, silence tends to be largely associated with men, and unfortunately, emotionlessness associated with men. But that's not kind of the norm. That's not the model, or that's not the best for us anymore. And so, as we think about fatherhood following husbandhood, we also want to think about the child that's yet born and think about how we want to engage them. And will an element of that be the emotional intelligence to understand where a child is developmentally, and then how we might and ought want to communicate with them. That's why there's such a premium placed on vocabulary accumulation. There's a correlation between educational attainment, life success, tied to vocabulary or reading levels. And that's why any parent book 101, somewhere within the first 3 chapters, is going to talk about reading to your baby on a regular kind of basis. Not only is that a chance for parental baby infant bonding, but your child is hearing words and they're hearing vocabulary and they're becoming comfortable with more and more words. And there's a correlation between the amount of words a baby knows at a certain age. That's an indicator or a predictor of how they'll succeed in school and indirectly social circles going forward. Because one way in which children navigate social circles is through discussion, is through language, is through vocabulary. And the more sophisticated a baby has in terms of language or vocabulary variation, the ability to use synonyms and antonyms, they can manage and have fluidity in conversations, or they can use a little bit of creativity to work themselves into social circles or to work their way out of complex problems. That's why I would think that it would be very helpful for interracial couples to find biracial mixed type literature and books to read to their babies, because then their babies will become comfortable with themes that are talked about in these books, vocabulary, concepts that are talked about in these biracial children literature books, that will give them a vocabulary that they can use in circles when they're 5 or 8 and they're in school, and people might be coming at them with some curiosity or some kind of inquisition, or maybe they're trying to create hierarchy and they're playing with the phenotypes of biracial and Black kids. But if your child has a robust concept of words, structures, scenarios, and they can sort of weave in and out, they can come out of that conversation holding their own, or quite possibly having had the best of that exchange. And one of the ways in which peers create sort of membership and belonging is how they hold their own among one another, whether that's in competitive activity, whether that's on sports, whether that's in playground banter and play, or whether it's in conversations. Quiet children are often targets. Quiet children can be quiet for a host of different reasons. But if you have a child that wants to talk and wants to vocalize, and then they have a robust inventory of vocabulary by which to do so, to include elementary introductory levels around race, culture, diversity, geography, whatever the case may be. They can hold their own. And so when they're asked a question, they can say, hey, this is what I am. This is what I represent. I got love for grandma. I got love for my other grandma. I got love for mama. I got love for daddy, whatever the case may be. But they can nip in the bud some of the challenge rhetoric that's consistent with youthful young play. All right. If you guys are just joining me, I see we've increased the numbers. Welcome, welcome. This is a biraciality show where I'd like to get to know you. We've asked the questions a little bit earlier on as what is your biracial makeup? If you're willing to share that, what is your biracial makeup? My mother was a French European woman. My dad's a Creole black cat out of New Orleans. They met in the 60s. I was born in 68. That's your racial identity by birth. Okay. Now I'm asking the question, what is your culture? Are you making a distinction between your race identity by birth? And are you making a distinction between your cultural identity, which is how you choose to assert yourself in the world? Or are you like many biracial people? It depends on context, depends on circumstances and surroundings. Depends on circumstances and surroundings. And Dr. Wynn, if you're still here, feel free to ask a question or respond within the context of your own children. How do you identify culturally? For me, and it was a different time, y'all. It was a different time. There was much more positive, heightened questions for my age set. I'm saying 18 to 22 about what are you doing on behalf of culture. This was the time of the X hat. I was in college in 86 through 91. This is the time where the emergence of Spike Lee and similar kinds of movies, the music was permeated with message of resiliency, self-determination. We were oriented to have two types of books in our backpack. One was our college books, our textbooks, but also books of our own interest in choosing. The symbolic book that we all kind of started with was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then we would kind of go from there. We were getting equal dosages of King as well as Malcolm. Through Malcolm, we got introduced to the Nation of Islam, and then we began to understand religiosity in certain kind of ways. And then we were introduced to historical figures largely beyond the civil rights movement. The Deacons of Justice, Freedom Summer, the emergence of hip hop. And so sidebar ciphers were common, right? And we were all sort of reading so we could have nuggets of information to share, to hold our own in sort of post-event conversations, dorm room chatter, and discussion. And these were things that were directly tied to a cultural currency, right? I understand today, I don't get the sense that that is the same or that it has broadened, that the conversations are not as narrowly Black nationalistic as they were in my era. And now they've opened up much more to include a multiplicity of other kinds of identities, which I think is important, perhaps overdue, welcomed. And for those voices who weren't present, I'm sure they are very relieved that they are being talked about now as an identity with the intersectionality, DEIB, all that kind of work. And so beautiful folks are finding themselves more representative. But in that process, knowledge or time is finite, right? It's not exhaustive. And so as new communities have entered into the sphere of dialogue and prioritization, Blackness has sort of rearranged itself. And then if you look in sort of popular culture, I won't offer too much commentary on this, but we are not as sort of Black uplift as perhaps we were in my day, and the large symbols of that are going to be movies, music, and then now, what are some general themes that are going on in social media? Although there's identity themes going on in social media, but as you all know, there's a lot of messery too. A lot of messery. All right. So if you're just joining us, welcome. Biracialities, learning and better understanding the lived life of biracial folks. If you guys are listening in, cool. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I thank you. If you are a white mom and you got a biracial kid and you want to better understand some communities that are living this, ask that. Feel free to ask that. If you don't want to use your name, use one of these nicknames, right? Use whatever you want to use. But most thing is to ask your questions. It is highly important that with 42% of beautiful babies being raised by single parents that are of two or more races, that whether it's father or mother, they have a sounding board, someone they can pose some questions to. I can answer from a 54-year-old perspective with 6 kids who are biracially presenting, although configuratively, heritage wise, they're more black than I am. I can answer from that perspective. Jose is a 60-year-old cat. He's been around folks. He's Afro Latino. I'm putting that on him. He's Latino. He could answer some questions. Mulatto Vanguard's in his mid 30s. Dr. Went is a mother of biracial children, and she could also answer some questions. So this is not a space for this is not a space for grief, for rumor, for attack. This is a space for understanding and people to articulate kind of their journey into and through biraciality. As I talked about, I'm biracial, I'm black identifying, but I had an epiphany about a year ago that there's a new era of thinking about biracialness, and there's a number of things that are in place, unlike my generation, that actually warrant the question of consideration about some intra connectivity by biracial folks, even if within a blackness or independent of it. If you look at my day, 1% of people were considered biracial or mixed. Today it's 10% or 38 million people. When you have that kind of critical mass, you ask different kinds of questions, or you move through cultural navigation in a different kind of way. If you are among 5 biracial kids at your entire middle school, you move a certain kind of way. But if you're among 10% of a middle school biracial kids, you move a different kind of way. And so today's generation, rightfully so, is asking, I think, elevated, curious kinds of questions. And although there's not definitive answers, a becoming starts with questions. A becoming starts with circumstances. A becoming starts with an inward reflection about oneself and one's place in particular. And if you're not satisfied with your current place, you will at least look outwardly. And you may not be able to look to something definitive with clear cut boundaries and rigid boundaries, but you'll see something that hints at what you're sort of thinking about and that lines up with at least a common lived aesthetic experience as you. All right. So if you guys are just coming in, how do you identify culturally? Love to hear it. All right. Jose says, I see myself as Latino because I embrace Spanish, African, and the native peoples, right? So Jose's has Puerto Rican background, and if you understand, migration patterns and the way people come together from different backgrounds, you have indigenous people, typically the original inhabitants of a land. You then have travel for nefarious or good reasons, and the people come together. And there's one thing about humanity is when human beings come together, eventually they're going to get curious about each other. And then they get curious enough, they start kissing on each other. And then eventually comes babies, right? And then obviously African, right? African as an original, as a mother continent, and continent of origin of which many communities traveled outward and interdispersed throughout different communities to include Latino, then obviously you have strong representation. And so even though Jose is an example of a person that's claiming a dominant cultural identity, but also acknowledges the beauty and the variety within himself, which kind of models my example. I sort of align in a blackness because that's easier for me. There's examples of that. There's destination for that. There's organizations to join. There's books to read, right? And so it was kind of a package deal. I could easily plug into it. Today's biracial folks don't necessarily have something so easily to plug into. But even though I have a dominant identity by which I line up with, I also acknowledge within me, both French. My mother's father's from Algeria, so there's some Arabic that's tied into that. My father is Creole by way of Santo Domingo, and then obviously you go back a number of folks. Then you're on the continent, right? All right. Magic Malata is in the house. She says hello. Hello, Malata. We are just kind of extending the biracialities interview questions here to within us. And so one of the first questions we asked, what is your birth configuration identity? And some folks have answered that, primarily Jose. And then we were on the question of how do you identify culturally, making the distinction between birth identity and cultural identity, right? Acknowledging that folks identify culturally in different kind of ways. And for mama and daddy listening in from the parenting perspective, your child in one case may be a pro black afro pitch pick in the hair, beret, fist raised kind of young person, right? And the next day they are maybe immersed in the symbolism of the other kind of culture. In one case they might be critiquing blackness and critiquing whiteness, and they're just going to evolve, right? And all of this is a part of their identity formation, the robustness, sort of picking from the limbs and the leaves of everything that they're made of. And they're going to go through evolutions. They're going to go through thinking evolutions that many different people do. All right. Magic Mulata, same. I'm an American mulata. All right. So okay, Mulata's brought nationality and ethnicity or culture into her identity. How people name themselves, y'all, is a very intentional thing, right? They're seeking to name themselves and they want to be 100% accurate or concise in some cases. And to do that, you have to then take the good, the bad, the ugly. You have to, not have to, that's a proverbial speaker's rhetoric, but in that process, you're self examining, right? And you're what you call yourself, the same way your parents named you something, they were trying to give you a certain kind of power in your name. But then you name yourself culturally. And then how you name yourself is literally a political act. It's either an act of resistance, it's an act of joining with, it's an act of even if it's an act of uncertainty, because you might have labels that are easily accessible to you or placed upon you, but you don't quite feel you want to take on that. So even a placeholder identity or a temporary identity is a reaction to how one sees themselves in the broader collective sphere, right? And so to go through exercises of precise naming can be very healthy because your identity is then rooted in that particular moment in time in something that you thought through and something that you want to put out as sort of your calling card should the question even be raised. And for biracial kids with relative ambiguity, they know the question's coming, right? They know the question of what are you, right? I don't think that's asked maliciously in most instances. I think it's asked out of genuine curiosity. And so when we answer that question, or when that question is answered, it's almost in preparation for it. And you're saying in your response, however you respond to it, you're telling them something about yourself or your particular frame of thought at that moment. Now, as moments pass and continuously pass, moments pass, eventually, as you gain more information, as you think more deeply about the identity, nuance, and dynamic, you may change your name. That's why I respect the conversation going on today in the biracial space, because these folks have thought about it. They're not ping pong reactionary. They've examined their life lived, they've examined how they fit among broader communities, and they're telling you something with how they identify themselves. All right. All right, let's go. Adonis. All right. I don't know if you've ever been here. Now, that doesn't mean you don't, brother. I'm 54 and boy, I can forget something in a minute. Adonis says I'm gray American, US. All right. I dig that gray. I dig that gray. When I have a national speaking company, and in my bio it talks about getting beyond the proverbial gray, right? Gray is this mesh of black and white in the color spectrum. Gray also symbolizes an uncertainty. It symbolizes a vagueness, right? I'm not saying, Adonis, this is what you're saying, but gray, in terms of a juxtaposition to rigid black white, both in commentary and in America's racial dialogue, the gray conveys kind of a middle, right? And so even as I'm interpreting this, and I could be completely interpreting it wrong, Adonis is playing off of color nuance, but also literal definitional nuance when it comes to his identity assertion, my interpretation. All right, mulatto prince is in the house. Who's that? All right, maybe that's Adonis. All right, they're exchanging placeholder identity. What do you mean by that, Magic Mulatto? Use a collective. Don't agree on what the name we should call ourselves yet. Use as a collective. Okay, I think I think Mulatto is referring to mulatta or mulatto, which is a current holder that distinctively conveys within mixed identity black white, right? And that because of the historical luggage associated with the name, some folks are for it, some folks are not. But I think I've also heard rather than bog down in the name, that we use that as that is used as the placeholder or something that represents this current moment. So other activity of action, of which I think the community is seeking largely at the census level for a distinctive black white ability to check the box, and that would be better time spent seeking that historical moment, and then get on to the more nuance of specificity and name. That's just me interpreting. When it's all said and done, without each other, without our biracial people in our lives, we got nothing. All right. So Adonis and others are representing this a newer generation that's saying, hey, it's time for something new. It's time for something distinct. I applaud that thinking. I always ask that it kind of simply transitions as a historical handoff from a maternal culture of blackness, that is not done in a rigid accusatory kind of way. I also understand communication nuance, but for mothers and fathers who are raising biracial children, there are communities of people who have lived a similar life to your children and have come to certain kinds of conclusions. And I think it would be healthy, family. I think it would be healthy that not only do you tap into sort of black spaces, that you tap into white spaces, although the broader society will certainly orient any American to white themes and whiteness. You'll also have whiteness represented in family, in this instance, post civil rights, which is the beginning of the modern era of biraciality. My musings would largely be a white mother and a black father. You'll pick that up in the house, but also there's burgeoning and growing spaces of biracial folks who are telling their story. There's also a budding accumulation of research. One of the ways that this thing makes sense to me is because the community is being studied. The community is being studied. If you look at Google Scholar, and you type in black white identity, there's over 100,000 articles, and these articles are legit, peer reviewed, they're public, and so the community is being studied, which is really a precursor to being able to say anything about it. You can express testimony, you can express sentiment and feeling, but if you have data that tells your story, and then you can juxtapose that to other cultures and communities, well, then you identify areas that are positive and areas that are problematic. And if you're looking for something to give you a cultural glue, well, being like-minded to solve your problems, that gives you action. And then when you take action, and then you can reflect upon whether or not it worked, and the more and more you accumulate successes and milestones, the more and more you create connectivity and the emergence of something that looks like a commonality. Commonality is the precursor to community. Community is the precursor to culture. All right. What? Let's see. Y'all getting ahead of me. When it's all said and done, without each other, without biracial people in our lives, we got nothing. Okay. The Grays with the aliens. Okay. If you use the name Mulatta, then use it and be proud. Don't let others choose for you. All right. Mulatta, don't like gray. A lot of love. We can't be gray yet. I think our identity will develop itself on its own as we go. Okay. So these beautiful folks are having an intra conversation within the chat, which is perfect. For those of you listening in, our numbers are up. Appreciate you. Thank you guys for joining us. Feel free to pose questions in the chat directly to myself or just to the tone and the tenor of the chat as well. If you have a YouTube channel, please drop that in the chat as well. Feel free to promote what you're doing here within this page. My goal is to bring new introduction, just like I was introduced largely through Mulatto Vanguard to this emerging conversation, and I find it fascinating. I believe it's a social anthropological beginning of something new, possibly. Maybe it'll begin and then fizzle out, but it'll go in sort of the abstract, invisible history of an attempt to assert itself, and it'll be a space for learning for future folks who may want to take that mantle up again, or this will continue to go on in different kind of ways. And I think it'll have longevity and sustainability because biracial people wake up and go to sleep, and birth more biracial kids that wake up and go to sleep. And identity, we're reminded of that in on weekly, daily basis. And so the question of what am I is a question that will perpetuate itself, and continuous answers and the evolving of that answers will continually perpetuate itself. All right. All right. So the question is, how do you identify culturally? All right. Without each other, we have no community, no identity, no sense of belonging. We're just scattered pieces through society. Eventually down the road, and I imagine that there is some organization to the biracial community. I haven't seen that presented outward, and it might not be time for that. But to Adonis's piece about scattered throughout, right? There is no doubt that in every city, in every village, in every tent, whatever the case may be, there's biracial folks, there's mixed race folks. 17% of all newlyweds are interracial couples, and that means they're going to be producing more and more biracial people, and critical mass is here, and the trajectory for continued interracial relationships, largely black and white, is going to continue. You can have your own cultural political assessment of that. That's a great conversation for another channel. But here, them babies are going to be born. And so you're scattered about, but you're looking for commonality. You're looking for a way to come together. I would invite you all on the broad agenda to think about, if you're not organizing, have a meeting, right? Get a meeting of a few like-minded individuals. Get yourself a simple agenda. Think of what your action item is going to be, tap into expertise, and go get it. Let it be a low-hanging fruit so you can have success, and then kind of move on and build out your agenda. The other pieces, coming together, simply coming together, and then establishing parameters. If you come together physically, it'll minimize the banter and he, she, they, them kind of dynamic, because there's something about an elevation of civility when you're in the presence of each other. But if you're going to do it technological, maybe do a Zoom and just invite the people, and don't do it for the public, and just come together and maybe do some icebreakers, some get to know you names, but begin to know each other beyond their personalities, because there's something about the YouTube space where we're performing, or we're cautious about reputation and word use, right? But behind all of us is a human personality, right? Some of us are assholes, some of us are cool people, some of us are the life of the party, whatever the case may be. But sometimes it helps to decompress from the urgency of what your cause, and to get to know each other in more connected, less intense kind of ways. All right. No matter what, I'll keep going back here. We're subconsciously isolated when we pretend we're a part of the black community or white community. All right. So you're of the white community, you're of the black community, but many of the sentiments is that we're not 100% any one of them, right? And at a subconscious level, that can be isolating. I certainly can understand that. I felt hints of that. I, for me, feel 100% black, but that was my circumstances. And for folks who are, I think Adonis is representing a sentiment that a kid that is 10 today, 15 today, would share this sentiment. I was having a brief conversation with my 23-year-old on the way back today, and he had mentioned checking out a few of the channels. I was kind of happy. He was checking out a few of Pops's presentations, and he too expressed a time where he felt gatekept within blackness. He certainly felt it within whiteness, and And so that let me know that the sentiment is even within my own children, right? I would advocate that hopefully you can find a sense of the opposite of isolation. You can find a sense of membership in both blackness and in both whiteness, in a diversity of friends. But then there's this new elevated presence, this tangible presence of mixed kids initially, and then it can even further stratify itself within black white. Powerful. Mulata, I agree, and I don't think we need official identity right now. Nothing sticks. Okay. Gray doesn't stick. Gray's all right. I like gray. I think us getting to the point where we see ourselves as grown and collective will be a good start. Okay. Hit the like. Magic Mulata says, hit the like. Yeah. Thank you guys. What they say? Likes are free. Likes are free. All right. Let's go to the next question. Appreciate y'all coming in. Appreciate y'all coming in. All right. What is positive from your experience about being biracial mixed? What is positive? What is positive from y'all's opinion about being biracial and or mixed? America is a very individualistic culture. Do you think that helps us or hurts biracial people? I did a show called Biracial Communalism. I don't know if that's the title, but I know the word communalism is in there. Mulata, America is highly individualistic, particularly those Americans who identify as white. Most cultural communities have a sense of communalism because of their circumstances of entry or entered upon America. If you look at the indigenous community, supposedly they were living a life where they had groups, they had battle, but they had an identity that was relatively an ethnicity within homogeneity. So you had a group of people who somewhat appear to be of the same common ancestry, but as groups do, if you get large enough, you'll then stratify. And out of the stratification, you have then tribal names and those kinds of things. And when you have colonial visitation or people who come and show up and you don't unannounced and you don't know, right? All of a sudden, there's a relationship to measure. And if it is one where the one group is seeking to impose dominance upon another group, that group will then have a tension, if not an outright strong, vicious self-preservation posture to the external threat and nemesis. Now, if you have a common threat, all of a sudden your ethnicity and tribal identity goes away, and then you have a shared collective identity, which typically is common ancestry when you look at cultural communities. Indigenous communities have had this. If you look at the relationship between sort of South America in proximity to North America, there's an indigenous Mexican Latino component tied to that. They then have an interface with North America, and then there's an oppositional dynamic there. If you look at the Black experience here in the U.S., involuntary migration, they then have an adversarial, oppressive, dominant relationship to a broader society. So any community that has had to navigate threat, perpetual threat, and they can be the subject of violence and terrorism, not based upon behavior, but based upon birth condition, will be communally oriented, because community comes out of self-preservation, and self-preservation is the goal of any community that finds itself on attack based upon phenotype. And so there's a bunch of cultural communities in the US who are communal, but the pathway, if you had less melanin, is you could assimilate by negotiating religiosity, accent, dress, and storytelling. You could find yourself immersing into whiteness. And so biracial people, for the most part, you still have presentations of color. You still have evidence of melanin, and therefore you have the potential, should you so desire, to continue to bring in a communal identity within biracialness, even though you're navigating and rethinking your dominant identities. And so America is very individualistic, yes, Do you think that helps or hurts biracial people? I think I would encourage the maintenance of a communal identity. I think you're going to navigate color politics in your life lived as individuals and a group kind of going forward. If you are become individualistically oriented, you're taking on traditional American kind of values, and you just have to sort of think what works best for you. The one thing that comes out of communalism is resiliency and always trying to through challenge, through protest, through culture, through arts, through voice, through movement, is challenging the nation to live up to its highest self. Culture is sort of a balancing. Communalism is sort of a balancing of democracy. Capitalism is our economic model. They want to assert themselves for financial profit and gain. That's our current model. But the balance to that is communalism, is to care for people beyond yourself, initially who share your same birth circumstances, but at its highest level is to have a concern and care for people who do not share your birth identity nor your circumstances, right? That's the balancing of democracy. Long-winded, my thoughts. Feel free to agree or disagree. Where are we at? Where are we at, beautiful family? Y'all doing well? If y'all doing well, can somebody throw a one in the chat or something? Just let me know. I'm all right here. For me, I think it neither hurts or helps us. Okay. Gray would be politically powerful, realistically. The Gray Panther Party. I think an old people have that. They already have that. The Gray Panther Party. Positive is people trust us racially. Okay. Yeah. 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 People trust us racially, right? Is that a form of colorism? Yeah. People trust us racially. Yeah. Yeah. The inverse is problematic, right? So if they trust biracial people, they trust them over who, right? And so all kind of stereotypes evoke. But yes, I've had conversations in the biracial space, and they seem to have a resistance to acknowledging biracial privilege. I uh, I don't have a problem with acknowledging that, but I'm open to being educated. And yeah, if you move through the world and you have a closer association to the comfort and appearance and nuance that power brokers of the broader society see and revere, and you're something closer to that versus maybe your father and grandparents community, yeah, and there's a bit of an elevated start, right? At some point, you'll be judged and evaluated on what you do, but things that are subjective are always vulnerable to whatever's in the mind of the evaluator. Things that are subjective are always vulnerable to whatever's in the mind of the evaluator. Things that are objective, you typically find pretty equitableness. If you're running a 100-yard dash, you can see the gun go off and you can see who finishes it, right? But if it's an English paper, a promotion, praise to be delivered out into the broader society, those are subjective. Subjective measurements are always vulnerable to whatever's in the mind of the evaluator. As a mixed person, they can share what are elements of the other cultures. Yeah. Yeah. It's this duality, it's this triplicity, it's this multiplicity that you see the world from multiple different perspectives, which teaches you the first lesson of genuine communication, that there are multiple sides to every story. There's multiple perspectives to other stories. Those of us who kind of grow up in a certain region, a certain zip code with a certain narrow rigidity, right? We tend to have a worldview that's influenced by our limited understanding of it. And then we get bold to believe that we are the only ones to believe that way and we are right. Right? The fact that in your DNA you have both victor and victored. You have both conquered and conquered. You have both praised and denounced, whatever the configuration is. I'm free flowing here. The fact that it's in you forces you to look inwardly and tell the truth to yourself. You have beauty and complexity and bullshit in all people. Both sides trust us, so it's not colorism. Okay, I feel you. And the native peoples, yeah. All right. I just feel like we live here, but none of these cultures benefit us, black or white. They both leave us out half of us. We don't have a culture or a community of our own, right? This is the sentiment, parents listening in, of perhaps your children. This is the sentiment. Not all, right? But an increasing percentage. They feel like we live here, but none of those cultures benefit us. They both leave out half of us, right? I'm putting words here into Mulatto's mouth or thumbs here, or her texting fingers, but they leave out half of us, right? In my generation, we silenced our white mothers, right? We silenced them. We acknowledged them. We had moments of embarrassment when we were in a public space with our mothers because we were just trying to fit in, and all of a sudden the biraciality is pronounced, right? These are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year old kids trying to navigate peer acceptance in circles, right? And that's a part of the BS that today's generation is talking about, right? That they want to be able to move in a space and either one, not have their identity evoked or their cultural participatory membership evoked or called upon, right? But in and when it is, that one can sit in their own, stand on their own 10, and be equally proud, representative, and articulative of a white mother and a black father, or in the case of some folks, a black mother and a white father. Wow, dope. Man, I'm appreciating y'all rocking with me, man. Appreciate y'all rocking with me. We are at 56 minutes. I typically stay within the hour. Y'all let me know in the box if we want to go a little bit more. Let me get to these questions. Latinos are people who culturally background is from Spain, Africa, and I don't know what ABD and we are always outside looking in and don't know what it's like to have our own community or culture. Hmm. I feel you. Latinos are ethnically mixed. Another positive is we can help race relations for black people and white people, but I don't think we should do it for free. The arbiter, the consultant, the ombudsman, the in between. Huh. Well, I don't know if you should pay some random biracial person, but to your point, if you have a skill set, you have a consulting company, you are versed in, sort of consensus seeking negotiation strategies, you're bringing up a very interesting business. I know other communities are always looking at ways to have a unique source of income or something that's broadly or stereotypically associated with that particular community. You can think grocery stores, nail salons, barber shops, right? But is there something equivalent for mixed people, right? But maybe there is something in this race relation, this cultural collaborative space. I don't know. I'm just kind of musing here, but yeah, if your life lived best positions you to understand and have a skill set in this, and then you got the skill set in the capacity for it, huh? Maybe that is kind of a narrowed lane. All the stories and traditions of mulatto in the past have been completely erased. Is that true, mulatto? All the stories and traditions of mulatto in the past have been completely erased. Yeah, maybe maybe the some of the organizations and societies in the South, particularly New Orleans, perhaps some of that has been lost or not a part of popular culture. But mixed people or multi generationally mixed or biracial kids, throughout century or adults throughout centuries have been recorded, alongside monoracial folks in terms of what their contributions have been. And there are quite a few people who are biracial or multi generationally mixed who have contributed, particularly to Black uplift and resistance, in part because, candidly, one way in which biracial kids find space and membership is by taking on causes and leadership. And I understand there's critique of that in the modern era, but hats off, man. Hats off to a generation who saw problematic racism in their society, oppression, discriminatory laws that impacted them in many instances, even though they may have had some benefit in there because of skin color comparisons, but who chose to be on the side of resiliency and chose to do that within a maternal Black cultural home. All right. Some Latinos don't embrace all three aspects of our culture, right? Yeah, again, identity, the articulation of it is political. It's political in what you say and what you don't say. And it's also emotional at times. It can be we're avoiding, we're trying to rewrite history, right? Identity politics is something, boy. Excuse me. Biracial and mixed are not official terms, they're replacement holders. Okay. No wonder the referee shirts are black and white. Walter, how you doing, Walter? I uh I don't know what that means. Oh no, maybe it's because you're supposed to be neutral. Okay. So tongue in cheek, a biracial potential revenue market or corner of the market of among many markets could be the arbitrator of sort of racial tension, black, white, and beyond. And the symbol could be a referee, the logo. I'm playing. Walter, welcome. Thank you so much for coming in. I don't think you've ever been here before, but again, my memory's not the best. We are asking the question: how do you identify culturally? Um, and we're making the distinction between identity from birth. My mother's from France, white European woman. My dad's a Creole black cat from New Orleans. I obviously am born biracial, and then culturally I identify as black, coming of age, particularly in college in 1986, born 1968. Welcome, brother. If you want to contribute to the conversation in terms of how you identify culturally, whether it's biracial or something else, please do. You're more than welcome. We have been easing racial tension for free. Why? There is money in politics. Talk to him, Adonis. So in this proverbial mythical organization, or maybe it's real, right? You build out your agenda, right? I'm hearing from this conversation, what is a low hanging fruit action item? I'm hearing from this conversation a distinctive name, right? That's in self examination. I'm hearing in this conversation, is there a way to commodify? Is probably not the best word, but is there a way to financially capitalize on something that is unique to the duality of identity, right? And I have a certain comfort speaking in on biracial issues because I live that life. I'm often invited to speak, particularly to black male audiences, which include biracial kids, because I've devoted much of my life to teaching and working with beautiful black men, biracial men, and I commodify that. I make money off of that, and from a creativity perspective, if you have success, if you have consensus, and then if you have a way to galvanize, and many cultural communities have distinguished themselves over decades and centuries by mastering particular markets, and we'll stay away from going any further with that, given the modern what's going on in these social media streets. Exactly, referees don't work for free. Okay. La, la, la. Dr. Wynn, you still in here? This is beautiful. Walter, good point. Okay. We play referee for free. A lot of love is exhausted and gets old real fast. All right. Well, if people come to you over and over again for a particular skill set, they're seeing in you expertise, and then the natural next step ought to be, well, okay, well, how can I elevate this? How can I clean this up and make it something that's substantive, and then how do I market it, and then how do I gain revenue from it, and then what is my purpose with the revenue gained? Is it to increase my pocket, or is it in some way to help advance the causes of my people? If you are individualistically, rigidly capitalistically oriented, you will go through this trying to think about it from your pocket perspective. But if you are communal, to Mulato's point a little bit earlier, a part of you will also be considerate of people. And it is no problem to be considerate of your people, however you might define that. That's one of the things I teach. I say, hey, get your education. That's going to benefit you personally and your nuclear family. Develop a craft and an expertise. Gain your sense of revenue from that. Think about generational wealth, but also think about through philanthropy, through cause and ethical alignment, what is it you want to be relevant to, either with your direct works or your financial resources, and make that customized, right? You can be very targeted. When you do the United Way form, it asks you very targeted who you want your money to go to. When you spend your money at the grocery store, you spend your money with culturally owned businesses, you're intentionally doing a very high American act, and that's to use your money and to be very targeted in very specific ways. If you all are at a point to where there's something that's mixed, multicultural, biracially based, and you want to take your earning, your expertise, your time, whatever the currency is that's available to you, give that to your particular community. So on your proverbial agenda, right? What is your philanthropy, right? What is your organizing body? Yeah, who is your researching entity? Who's your think tank, right? What's your think tank? We feel like it's an obligation. It's really hard being born into two different groups of people with a horrible history and hate each other. Yeah, that's a part of the tension. And a part of my generation, the reason we had no problem identifying with black because we had just come off of learning the history of white supremacy and oppression. And what group would you want to line up with, right? So we clearly wanted to line up with blackness. But this generation, not only are you articulating outwardly a love for both love sources, mama and daddy, but you're going to have to reconcile your feelings around this narrative of what whiteness means and what blackness means. Blackness is problematically the inheritors of negative problematic stereotypes. White folks are the still being associated with historical acts of oppression, and then there's countless evidence of example that manifest themselves today. And you have that within both of you. With you have both of that within inside of you, and you have to have the capacity. Again, speakers proverbial use of words, it helps to have the capacity inside of you to acknowledge this, to find language to reconcile with it, but at the same time to shield yourself from it. That doesn't mean that you then take complete separation from either one of the cultures, but you're going to have to heal that and reconcile that within yourself, and that's going to require some internal conversation, some personal reading, some sort of taking a list of questions that have come your way that kind of made you unsettled, and think through those answers. And then once you are confident and kind of exhaustively have thought about it, you have to speak your truth, right? You have to speak your truth. If you get into intimate black thinking spaces, we will acknowledge outward threat. We will also acknowledge inward threat. I imagine there's within white circles and think tanks the acknowledgement of inward threat and the acknowledgement of outward threat. Same thing needs to occur whenever there is a mass gathering of some continuity and substance in terms of volume for biracial or mixed race kids. You will have to acknowledge what are internal threats and what are external threats, right? All that guides identity formation, beginning with self. Hmm. How we doing in here, family? How we doing? How we doing? A lot of let's capitalize on it and charge them. This is a capitalist country. Let's get with the program. And a little asterisk with a hint of communalism, please. A positive thing is that we think we are very different, and that's a valuable thing. A positive thing is that I think we're very different, and that's a valuable thing. Yeah. The one question I would ask the community to reflect upon: do you think you're different, and are there some that thinks they're better? That's a question that I think the biracial community, if I was putting together a conference and I was thinking about inward threats and outward threats, I would definitely think about what is the perception from, in my interest would be from the black community, or to say it from my black mama or my black father's line, right? What is the perception of what we're doing? The perception of that is tied to how you do it, right? It is one thing to say you're different, you're unique. That can be neutral. That is a very true statement. But if you have a lot of voices that were saying we're better, right, without just better, and we're basically just asserting ourselves on the hierarchical human chain, which to me is an affirming of one of the greatest challenges to America, is that we're obsessed with human hierarchy. And if I were advocating for anything, I would advocate the dismantling of human hierarchy. The measurement of hierarchy is inequitable in statistics. the more you can have equitable statistics across a number of variables, right? However, that comes about over time, work, efforts, programs, whatever the case may be, the more leveling we have, and we're seeing increase across all indicators, but the more level varying that we have to include examination of mixed race identity, two or more races across multiple variables, then you're getting close to eliminating human hierarchy. You're going to have pockets of stratification, but what do you mean by different? I don't mean you, mulatto, but proverbially, what do you mean by different? If it's better, man, that sounds quite white. All right, we need social capital. An essential element of social capital, social trust, engaged citizenship, and strong reciprocity. See, this is a paper right here. This is a conference conversation. This is this is a presentation on a channel, right? An essential element of social capital, social trust, right? Do we trust each other? Are we still in our phase of inward fighting, right? Engaged citizenship, that's the action. That's the action, right? And what determines action? Problems determine actions. Problems present themselves as the inverse of solution. Solution is implemented through action. Action is articulated in steps, right? Simple steps that anybody, at whatever level they're at, in terms of aptitude, resources, skill sets, they can grab a piece of one of those action items and be relevant. And then strong reciprocity, right? Developing coalitions, right? Strong reciprocity. Reciprocity to who, right? Reciprocity to who? Some element of that should be reciprocity back to a black maternal home. Hmm. I'm musing here, but that's a heck of a show. Both increase your pocket while helping your people. Two birds with one stone. Yeah, capitalism and communalism. All right. Yes, that's my brand ambassador for a biracial owned clothing brand. See? Clothing. Yep. Okay. All right. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read the rest of these chats and then I'm gonna see if there's anything else. All right. So if you got anything you want in the chat that you want read, feel free to put it in there now. If you have a channel you want to shout out, if you have a product you want to shout out, mom, dad of raising beautiful biracial children and black children, of which this channel kind of leans itself towards. If you have a question, feel free to put it in there. I can't say I'll answer it just yet, but maybe it can be the context by which I build another show. My goal as a person who's obsessively a father is to raise grounded, healthy, rooted, solid, independent being who have a healthy sense of themselves and can then generationally rear healthy, grounded children. This is my email. If I can be of any resource to you, again, I do not confess expertise. I confess life lived. Any movement is better served by when you have three generations. You have elders, middle elders, and youth, and they all have a different role to play. And they all need to listen to each other, as I've said on many, many occasions. All right, let me get back to the comments. Y'all doing good, by the way? All right. Same, we learned the history and aligned with blackness, but we got hated for being half white. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm learning. I'm learning that the gatekeeping, the bar, the measure just kept getting elevated, and y'all got frustrated. Maybe I would have got frustrated, but I had no alternative, nowhere else to go. So there's one of two things that my generation did. You isolated, you became anti-cultural, you became awkward, or you obsessed in other kinds of identities, or you kept digging and you found the vocabulary and the tenacity to hold your own. Now, I will admit, I have found my community is largely regional, it's fraternal, it's professional, that allows me to exist almost blindly in the blackness. But I do acknowledge that when I travel and I find myself in new circles of blackness that don't know anything about um, myself or whatever cachet or reputation I have, that I do realize, oh, okay, I got to go through this again to some extent. Now I've learned a little bit on how to cut through things pretty quickly, but yeah, I can understand if you're at your tipping point, then you're tipping towards something else. Most black people, like white people, biracial people, are only ones believing they're still fighting. Huh. Most black people like white people, Biracial people are the only ones believing they're still fighting. I'm sure there's more to that, Adonis. I don't want to do that injustice, but I think there's some dimes in there. I think there's some science in that. Adonis, feel free to hit me up if you wanted to process that or anything else. And got told we were not black and we should not be the face of blackness or black movements. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I have had many positive experiences with the biracial and multiracial community. Jose Negron, y'all check out his channel, Uncommon Sense with Jose Negron. This is an example of coalition. This is an example of reciprocity, right? This is an example of assuming it makes sense allyship or just genuine friendship. Shoot. No, I mean, we think different, like our way of thinking is different than most people. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Thinking, thinking is at least your words. Your words are the current voice of thinking shaped by experience. Your words voiced, articulated, are the current manifestation of thinking shaped by experience. And I absolutely believe the more breadth and the more broadness you have in your experiences shape your current thinking in ways that are at least accounting for more nuance. So for a child, a biracial kid, to grow up in a home where potentially no one in the home shares their same cultural configuration, or as the TikTok person, by the way, if y'all know that TikTok woman that was, asking for help to raise her biracial child because the child, wasn't comfortable in their skin because they were raised a person of color amongst all this whiteness, and she was struggling with that, right? For a child to go through that experience, they've had to look inward, outward repeatedly. They've had to almost over examine all kinds of situations. They don't know if they're not being picked on the team because they ain't got no skills, or if it's something because they don't share the same common cultural experience. There's all types of self questioning that goes on with biracial kids simply because they have the added nuance of being biracial or mixed, particularly if they're in monoracial matters, whether white or black. They can't simply eliminate that it's not their biraciality that got them that opportunity or denied them that opportunity, and they're spinning in that, right? Having went through that, although that's problematic, having went through that has contemporary currency because they've been forced to think about these issues, and hopefully, beautiful family, they landed in a certain kind of self-resolve. If a person can feel uncertainty in the subjectivity of what's in people's head, and they can find the internal confidence to not require that anymore, that is a very confident young person. Biracialness gives you the opportunity to develop that from a problematic circumstance. But once you learn that lesson, you certainly have a different way of thinking. And then you can translate that thinking into other things, uh, other aspects of life, whether it be business or personal development or personal projects, whatever the case may be. Thank you, Mila. Black people think they're better. I think it's the same mindset as a rapper. I'm the best rapper alive. A part of pride is thinking you're better. Black people think they are better. I think it's the same mindset. Yeah, yeah. It's one thing to think individualistically better, but when you get into groups in this space, that's reminiscent. I might be reading into your question, but that's reminiscent of whatever I said before. That sounds mighty white. In every community, there are good and bad in every community. Yeah, yep. There's beautiful people, there's complexity, and there's assholes. Every racial group should see themselves as better. It's not about your actions. Treat people fairly despite what you think. All right, so I'm getting a little clear. Yeah, there. If you look at Maslow, which is a psychological theory, a part of self-esteem development, which is the precursor to belonging. Belonging is the precursor to a grounded sense of self and confidence, of which all people go through. If you extrapolate that to a culture, yeah, but it's the individual associated with the culture that's kind of doing the reading and the self-assessment. Yeah, you might want to look out, and there's moments where you're self-protective, you're culturally protective, you're culturally comparing yourself, right? But culture there's a whole host of things that create culture. Some of it is subjective, some of it is objective, some of it is where you were born, what part of geography you're in, your historical ancestral story, right? And you can measure that in the current time. And I think it's okay and healthy to think highly positive of yourself. But if you then are in your own racial creation of hierarchy, I don't know if that's healthy. Or if you are sort of exalting yourself as culturally better, hopefully that has a deadline on it, that it's when it's met its purpose, you then transition through sort of high race loyalty into what ultimately is the next phase, which is an embrace of humanity, humanness, that a person is legitimate simply because they were born, right? In order to land in sort of a high level understanding and connectivity to human beings, right? You first have to go through culture. Culture gives you the boundaries of which to examine love, joy, pain, suffering, rituals, treatment of elders, commerce, sense of self definition, ownership of markets, right? These teach you tangible lessons. But the ultimate lesson, I believe, of culture is to teach you that all other people too have a culture. They just simply go through it in a nuanced kind of way, but then you finally land in this reality that everybody laughs, everybody sings, everybody dances, everybody cries, everybody dies, right? Culture is just a way, the vehicle, the luggage that you're using in this short journey, right? So yeah, it's okay to have inflated sense of ego of self, but we've seen that lesson before. We've seen how groups who wrongfully associate themselves as dominant superiority, we see how that plays itself out. Adonis, I'm using here, apologies if I'm off base in terms of the essence of your question. All right. Got me thinking on that. I'm against racial hierarchy. Boom. Having a healthy sense of esteem should not be based on feeling better than others. We don't need to do that. Okay. All right. These are good conversation points, right? These are good titles or subtitles to put into your conversations, right? Human hierarchy. Do we replace one sense of supremacy over another sense of supremacy, right? Is there a point to where culture should exaggeratively think about themselves? And is that important to accelerate bond and continuity, right? What's the pros of that? What's the consequences of that, right? Deeper kind of reflective conversation. If other people see themselves as better, you do need to see yourself as better in your own defense or be walked all on. All right, I'm gonna leave that there, Adonis, because that's a great topic unto itself. Just this sentence: if other people see themselves as better, you do need to see yourself as better in your own defense or be walked on. That's one strategy, but there's others. Okay. Women like being walked on, men don't. Okay. We've somewhere to go now, AJ. We've somewhere to go now, AJ. It's a new day. Thank you, Mulatto, for the comment. Being the better doesn't work in the art of war. Being the better doesn't work in the art of war. There's a book I think you're probably referencing, right? Yeah. And maybe this is also a good conversation for the community. What stage are you in? Right? Are you in grieving of cultural identity loss phase? Are you in rejection phase? Are you in a political phase? Are you in a reconciliatory phase? Right? What phase are you in? Because then that'll shape the conversation. Because one thing that's challenging, some people, in terms of identity, cultural formation, they might just want to be in venting phase, right? They might want to, they might just want to get it off their chest, right? They might be in FU phase. People who have perhaps done it a little bit longer and have went through that phase, they might be obsessed with solution phase, right? Right? Some people might be dealing with trauma. I don't want to use that word. They might be frustrated with home dynamics, right? They might be frustrated with their father. They might be frustrated with their mother, right? Right? What phase are we in? I need to probably do a piece on the phases of cultural considerations. I don't know. Thank God we are building communities for us. Being the bigger person doesn't work. Okay, we got that one. My bad. Black people worship white people. That's what I have come to understand. Some black people might, but not all. And that's generalization of narrative. Generalization rhetorically can be problematic. Some white folks worship black people too, but not all. Some biracial folks worship black people, but not all. Some biracial folks worship white people, but not all, right? Language, conciseness. Black people worship white people. That's what I've come to understand. Not all, but some. Exactly. I agree with that. Okay. Maybe they're all speaking to Mulatto's point. Black people worship white people. Is the black white, is this about black white biracials? Yeah, I'm using broad terms like mixed to acknowledge the fact that right now when we talk and we're looking at data, it's two or more races, which can be a host of different kind of configurations. But generally speaking from my own lens, which is black white, and then those who seem to connect with the page via their presence, it tends to be black white, right? But the opening question was, how do you identify racially, and then how do you identify culturally? And I'd love to know if that is something different than black white. I do think there are commonalities in life lived in this duality, in the proverbial gray, as I've associated kind of with my own earlier years of development. But at some point, you'll have biracial black white specificity in dialogue. Thank you, Hybrid the Hero. Yes. If someone tells me their race is better than mine, I'm going to say, no, mine's is better. Simple. Okay. In fact, that's what I would say. If someone said your race is better than mine, for one, I would look at them like they're out of their damn mind, right? And then I would quickly dismiss that person for a poor analysis of racial nuances over millennia, and I would dismiss it. But I understand the dynamic. Yes, Hybrid. Okay. Are you, and you're welcome, Hybrid, but fair warning, don't bring your Canadian drama series here. Okay. Walter says, LOL. Okay, now we're reminiscent. To me, there's some history that's bringing itself out here. There's some history playing itself out into the dialogue. I understand. That's an intra chat conversation. It doesn't seem derailing just yet. Our unique experience shape our thinking. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. To be fair myself, it was all I knew, so I couldn't compare it to anything. All right. We're getting close to the last of the questions here. No, I'm lying. I'm sorry. If y'all have other questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. Groups too. People think their football team's better. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sports that creates friendly camaraderie. The risk is not too high, other than maybe high blood pressure, and then the occasionalness where people get violent. But human beings are not teams. They have the full range of humanness and joy, love, and laughter, and problems and chaos. And this is simply a current measurement of time, but there's a lot of history and cause and effect that have went into that. Culture is a profound thing. Cultures cultures gone awry or problematic produce problematic babies, coupled with navigating external society. Cultures that can inherently build within itself certain values that they can underscore and assert can then predict on aggregate the healthiness of their babies generationally. I must admit that there's still a great deal I need to learn regarding biracial and multiracial people. All right. And that is coming from a person born in 1962, y'all. This grown man with full life lived just said, I must admit that there's still a great deal I need to learn regarding biracial and multiracial people. The human being that walks up to something that might even look remotely familiar and says, what am I here to learn today? That I like that kind of person. I like that kind of person. Still back, sit back and listen then. Okay, okay. Hybrid, you're more of a oh my goodness. Thinking positive of yourself is good. Thinking you're better just because you're racist is racism. No, yeah, it is. Whether it's in its infancy, but it's when it plays itself on mass scale, where you begin to make decisions based upon broad assumptions of a people. We don't want to be the recipients of that, however we identify. And if we don't want to be the recipients of that in good faith, we treat others like that. Now, when individuals come left or when individuals come problematically, you address individuals. All right. But, groups, you get my sense. Thinking versus actions. Yeah. We're all better of when we can learn from each other. Yeah. Okay. Let me read these in advance. Let me see. Okay, so Mulatto Vanguards, he's introducing you all to different phases, right? I'm past the rejection phase. I'm in the political phase now. So Mulatto, to put words and strategy into his mouth, is seeking like-minded individuals, right? He's seeking like-minded individuals. He wants to see coalition, and then whatever his political strategy is, he'll launch that, right? And within the range of where people are on biraciality, there's people who are there with you. It's when they become conflated and you can't dissect spaces for certain conversations for people at one level, spaces for other people at a certain kind of level, that they can then narrow in and do the work of the work and not have to keep refiltering itself because you're having phase confusion between people who are entered the same space with different phases or different, priorities. Okay. I meant being the better person doesn't always work. Every case is a case by case situation. Some situations you might need to see yourself as better. Yeah. Yeah, that's individualized, right? Individualized, yeah. Absolutely. To me, I think we're ready and plan to put in work to build for ourselves. All right. Malata, I would ask through you to the collective group and anyone listening in, where to me, I think we're ready and planning to put in work to build for ourselves, right? At some point, you're going to need an agenda. And the agenda is going to need to be delivered to a core audience, and the core audience needs to be they need to have some clarity, some ground rules, some consensus understanding. you know Metaphorically, how do you gather, right? Metaphorically, and maybe y'all are behind the scenes, I don't know. What's that? The OG wisdom. Can we stick with the subject, please? All right. Hybrid, my goodness. Not all, but most people, most black people love and worship white people. To grow up in America, yeah, you're going to have a sort of an imbalanced perspective of whiteness, right? Especially in K-12 environments. But Mulatto, I know where you're coming from. You've been in pro-black circles before. You know there's a percentage out there either not fitting that or working hard to get that out of them. Oh my goodness. Within every collective or group, there are a lot of different groups of thought within the group. All right. Black people are jealous of mulatto people because they wish they were closer to white people like we are. Colorism, huh? All right. Black people are jealous of mulatto people because they wish they were closer to white people like we are. See that statement, and mulatto boldly says it, but that is one of those. Mm, that is one of those. That's one of those linchpin ones, y'all. And in fact, as you continue to move forward, assuming you're seeking something distinctive, how you deal with that question right there will definitely determine how you're seen. And you might not give a dang on how you are seen, but if you're thinking long term, that question is a linchpin question to how you kind of go forward. Okay, Adonis and Hybrid the Hero going at each other. Have a good night, J4. Thank you for coming. Mulatto, I truly appreciate you. Let's see what else might be new. Okay, now we got the intra dialogue. That's what I'm calling it. All right. Yep. I think last thought here. Yeah, I agree. It's best to address the individuals of the group, but it's easy to lump everyone in as it's a bad habit we all have. Hard to differentiate individuals from the group. Yes. All right. Beautiful family. I want to thank y'all for rolling with me on a Sunday. I shared my email. Oh, it's still here. Should you want to process anything? I love these kind of dialogues because it gives me insight into what folks are sort of thinking. You can see from the chat, there's varying levels of place and time where folks are at. Um, but most importantly, as more and more biracial children are being reared and raised and born, it's important that there's outlets and platforms for understanding of what young people might be going through, but equally resources for beautiful parents who are raising these children. As I look out doing research, there's a lot of pages that are dealing with multiracial subject matter, biracial subject matter, and it is the aim of J4 Conversation to contribute to that in some kind of small way. If you go back to some previous videos, they're very parent specific. I enjoy that. I'm narrowing down into a biracial audience in part because of the continuous growing numbers, but also because I think biracialism or biraciality is at a crossroads, particularly generationally. My generation, the expectation was to pathway black. I did that. I enjoy that. And but my learning, my involvement in this space is discovering a bunch of beautiful young people who are like, nah, we don't know exactly where we're going, but we're going somewhere different. And I think hopefully the conversation will evolve to sort of process how that transition goes. But I hope it is done in a way that is a head nod and an extension of a maternal historical blackness. But inevitably, the numbers are just growing so fast and so quick that would also be perhaps lacking in foresight, lacking in vision, not to acknowledge this emerging group of people and thinking through is there opportunity for uh, an identity affirmation in a way that lends itself to creating healthy, grounded, beautiful, solid young people, both black and biracial, that grow up to be grown human beings raising the same in their children. All right. Beautiful family. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to read some of these chats here. We are in the after hour session now. So if you all were here for the conversation, thank you. You're more than welcome to bounce. You can also check out the next video that's coming up. If you liked the vibe, please subscribe, like the YouTube channel. That's free. But also, thank you guys for joining me. All right. We out. All right. So now I'm reading. We're in the after hour session. If there's any particular specific question for me. All right. You're welcome, Jose. Let me see if there's anything healthy in this banter going on. Otherwise, I'm going to remove it. Walter, this is such a precious space. Thank you, Jay, for much respect, sir. Much respect, brother. What's up, Slick? What's this going on? Hey, y'all, that's my brother. He's visiting from the shy. He's watching the show and just laughing at the comments. He said, "What the hell is this going on?" Slick, these are passion young people. These are passion biracial folks who are just seeing things different and they're expressing themselves. That's all it is. Slick Rick. Negron, I think he's talking to me. At some point, I would appreciate you on my platform. Yeah, just hit that Gmail, Jose, if you wanted to chop it up. Unless Jose is talking to someone else. But either way, invitation stands. All right, I think we are in full on venting mode now. Okay, beautiful family. Thank you guys so much for joining J4 Conversations. We shall see you on the next time. All right. Hopefully, y'all found some value in this, in addition to some compelling expression on how folks express difference in opinion. Peace, love.